lesson of our counseling class here, because we're going to talk specifically tonight about crisis counseling. So, this is our first little set of papers for tonight. Teresa as well. And Dan, you're going to sit. All right, so before we launch into this, I want to summarize very briefly the first 5 weeks. The difference between the first 5 weeks and what we're talking about tonight is the first 5 weeks are a type of counseling that would probably happen over a period of time. Could be months, could be years, that you're interacting with somebody who you have or develop a relationship with who's coming to you because they trust you, they see something in you that draws them to you. What they're responding to is Christ in you, is the Holy Spirit in you. But for whatever reason, they're coming to you. They might not even know you're a Christian. They might not be a Christian. But they're coming to you because there's something they feel you have to give them. And you do. So the process of everything we've talked about in the last 5 weeks is essentially giving people what you have. And I say it that way because we've talked about the fact that you can't give people what you don't have. So when it comes to the concept of biblical counseling, you've got to be sharing out of what is in you. Is the truth that is in you, the experience that is in you. So I just thought today, just thinking about that concept, I don't tell anybody, ever, how to prepare meat. I have no knowledge, no experience to back that up. I'm a vegetarian. So I could look it up on the internet, but it wouldn't be real. It's not something I live. It's not something that's part of my experience. So I would have to tell somebody who comes to me saying, what's the best way to prepare a steak, or how do you do chicken, this or that? I would say, you're going to have to ask somebody else. I don't really have the knowledge or the experience to tell you about that. By the same token, if somebody comes to me wanting to know, well, what would the Bible say about this, or even how would you handle this situation, which my framework's always going to be from the Bible, because the life that I've chosen to live is biblically based. Those questions I can answer. Okay, so we want to always be working from a place that whatever the situation is, we talk from in AA they use an expression, experience, strength, and hope. Okay, what are your experiences? What strength have you gained that's allowed you to get some victory in that area? And what's the hope that you're following? And our experience, strength, and hope is all in Christ. Okay, the experiences that change us are coming to know Him. He's our strength. The joy of the Lord's our strength. And He's our hope. Okay, the hope that's an anchor in times of turmoil. Which is why this fella could write this song, "It Is Well With My Soul." Can you imagine that? I can't imagine it. I really can't. It had to be a supernatural infilling of peace that came upon him in the midst of that tragedy. So, for 5 weeks we've been talking about what do you do, and how do you assess where the person's at, and how deep do they want to go with it, and if they're really serious, you can take them to that Bible study and application format or something similar where you get the Word of God out and you look for scriptures that pertain to their situation. You hold them up as a kind of a mirror that says, well, God says we should probably be operating this way. Do you think you are? And if you're not, do you think maybe that's what's wrong with the situation? And maybe how could we line up your life with what God's saying our lives should look like? And once again, if you can say it, how can we line up our lives? Let's do this together. We're all on the same journey. The Apostle Paul, talking about how much he was pursuing a relationship with Christ, specifically said, it's not that I've already attained it. It's just that I'm pursuing it. And I'm going to keep pursuing it. So we want to be operating from that place where all we can say to people is, I'm finding my answers through Christ. I'm finding my answers through the Bible. Would you like to join me? and we could find our answers together. That's the way we want to operate in terms of biblical counseling. Now, things change up a little bit if we're dealing with a crisis. So I want to spend this last session just talking about some aspects of what a crisis counselor does that's different from, meeting with somebody over a cup of coffee or sitting down doing a Bible study with somebody. In a crisis, you got to kind of operate a little bit differently. You're still operating from a biblical perspective, but the way you're handling the situation is more appropriate to the nature of what a crisis is and what a crisis does to somebody's life. So let's start out by saying this. What is a crisis? Okay, here's a definition for you. It's a calamity or event which disrupts a person's sense of well-being. It generally requires immediate action in order to restore balance and control to a person's life. Some of the symptoms that can arise out of a crisis would be anxiety, bewilderment or confusion, desperation, anger, helplessness, even apathy, which seems like an odd emotion to have in the midst of a crisis, but sometimes people, just to survive, just go into a mode of this isn't really happening. So their affect, the word affect means what you see, their countenance, their emotions that are visible might be very flat, like surprisingly so, like, and people may even say, how can you be so calm? And they're not necessarily calm as much as they're in shock, And all kinds of things can be the source of a crisis. It could be an accident, a car accident of some type. It could be the death of somebody in the family. It could be some type of legal problem. All of a sudden you get a visit from the police, somebody in your family's been arrested. It can be something where a person finds out that one of their children or family member is on drugs. It can be a child getting suspended from school, and just something that's just so out of the ordinary that it's hard for that person to process it. It's just out of the life experience that they generally are used to having, and now they're kind of being shaken by it. And somehow, by God's grace, He puts you or me in their path to help them deal with the crisis. So what are some of the things that you might see? One is disorientation, okay? A crisis can get somebody feeling like they just have lost touch with reality, like this can't really be happening. And so my notes might be slightly different because I have a little more on my page than you do, but people in accidents can wander aimlessly around the scene. They get out of the car and they're just walking. We don't even know where they're walking, okay? They just feel like I need to go somewhere. And if you ask them where are you going, they may not be sure where they're going. They're disoriented. Their train of thought from a normal day has just been blown off course. People who are grieving a death, especially a sudden death. It's a little different. My wife's mom, my mother-in-law, is in the hospital in Florida. She's on hospice. They're telling us it might be 4 or 5 months, and we'll get that phone call. Laura's been bouncing back and forth, trying to keep an eye on the situation. But when that end comes, it's kind of an expected end. It's not the same as what happens in a tragic death, where it's just person leaves, goes to the store, and doesn't come back. So you can see people sometimes dealing with that first stage of grief. Eleanor Kubler-Ross, the famous psychologist, developed a way of looking at how people process grief through stages. And the first stage is denial. And denial is more likely to show up in a tragic situation. No, that can't be true. That can't be true. You're lying, they might even say, if somebody tells them the news that somebody has died tragically. Some people might forget what day it is, what time it is. They might forget to do basic things that would be a sign of how rocked their world has been. You find out they haven't eaten all day long. Did you eat lunch? I don't know. I don't remember. Okay? They're not doing the things that you do during a normal day because everything's just been rocked to the core, and they can't even get a handle on how to get it back. Mental stress, and the ability to think Okay? People who are in crisis can't process the information fast enough, can't take in the information and figure out what's my next step. So they might want to do something, but they might look to do something impulsive. Just, I want this to be fixed right away. So they might do something that's out of character, and it might be drastic, and you might have to say, hold on, let's think about this a little bit. Or somebody who's normally able to make decisions is usually somebody who looks at a situation and says, I know what I'm going to do this. All of a sudden, can't make up their mind about anything. Well, do you want to do this or do you want to do that? I don't know. Just can't make a decision. Emotional stress. It looks different for different people. Some people are very expressive, okay? So in other words, they're talking a mile a minute. They're making a lot of hand gestures. They're very animated. Others might be very cool and aloof, just kind of standing back as if this isn't happening, like they're a spectator on their own life. And sometimes people will talk about a crisis, that's how it feels like I'm not even there. I feel like I'm looking at this from out here somewhere. What some people might refer to as an out-of-body experience, whether it's literally what they're having or not, but they feel detached from the situation. That's happening, but it's not happening to me. It's happening to somebody, and they look like me, but I don't feel like it's happening to me. And once again, it talks about the classical stages of the grief process, okay? Shock and denial, usually the first things you're going to see, okay? And by the way, there's no standard timetable for how people go through those stages, okay? So, and they might jump all over the place. So they might jump from denial to anger real quick. You think like, hey, stay in denial for a while. Anger's rough to deal with. But by God's grace, people can get to healing and resolution. But what might you see in somebody who's in a crisis situation? Crying, wailing, weeping, yelling, total silence. A lot of physical activity or no physical activity. A person being weak or even fainting. Fainting, just can't take it. They collapse over. It's not a physical thing, it's just an emotional thing, and the body just shuts down. Can't do it, don't want to be here. So, how do we do the same thing that we've been talking about for 5 weeks? How do we bring the Bible and the principles of the Bible into the situation that's a whole different sort of animal from that methodical, let's have a cup of coffee, you're going through some things in life, let's talk about what the Bible says. This is more, you got to deal with it, and you got to deal with it fast, okay? Now, somebody had said this, which isn't a bad way of looking at it. Crisis is an opportunity in disguise, okay? It's an opportunity to bring Christ into a situation to somebody who desperately needs two things, and they both start with H. They need hope, and they need help. Okay? So, for those of us who believe, what? God is the ultimate refuge. We know it is well with my soul. So, we have people who may be believers who are going through a crisis. If they're going through a crisis, we can immediately try to help them latch onto that rock. Okay? If you know they're a believer, get them to the rock as quick as you can. Okay? You don't have to give them a big lecture or whatever. Just say, you know God's here with us. Let's pray. Let's just trust Jesus to get us through this. If they're not a believer, you still want to get them to understanding that God's going to get them through this, but you may be dealing with a situation where they don't want to hear about God. They may be angry at God. They may blame God for the crisis. Okay, so you have to be gentle and you have to be willing to understand that if you're Christ's ambassador and they're mad at him, they might be mad at you for bringing up his name. Okay? But in any way, you're still there. You're his representative. You are the hands and the feet and the voice and the heart of Christ in their situation. And you've got to understand that just being there, being a person who cares, brings them hope. So, they need hope, but they also need help. Okay? Hope is humanity's greatest need, and God is best able to fill it. But Those who are in crisis need help too, human help. They need company. They might feel lost. They might feel fearful. They need somebody to be there. People who they know real well are best, but even a stranger can bring comfort in a situation to somebody who's in a crisis. Now, in the book of James, it talks about that if somebody comes to you and they're desperate, they need clothing, daily food, they have nothing. That's kind of describes a crisis situation. And James says, if you say to them, well, peace unto you, be ye warmed and filled, and send them on their way, you've done nothing. Okay? You're trying to give them the first H without the second H. You got to give them help and hope. Okay? You got to do both. So we have to understand that there's practical things that need to be done. It's kind of like the little story about the boy who calling out to his parents and saying that he wants them to come in his bedroom because he's scared. And they're trying to get him to be a little more grown up. So they tell him, it's okay. God's in there with you. You're not alone. He says, yeah, but I'm scared. They said, but it's okay. God's in there with you. So he says, yeah, but I kind of need somebody with skin on. And that's what we are. We're the skin in the game, okay? We're the ones coming in and representing God, bringing help along with hope, okay? Remember, we're dealing with people potentially that don't have the ability to make a decision at that moment. They're disoriented, their thinking is blurred, they've got all these emotions going around, and they might need somebody to just take them by the hand, which leads us to the next thing on your paper there. What people need sometimes in a moment like that is touch, physical touch. Now we have, and rightfully so, in our world today, become a little skittish about touch because of the terrible ways that people touch other people. You've got this nasty thing that's come to light in Hollywood of all this inappropriate touching that's going on, and it's just horrible. It's a terrible thing. But God created human beings to touch and be touched. And it brings tremendous comfort to people sometimes when somebody literally is holding their hand. And I think that's a form of touch that we can, almost all of us can say, is not too problematic. Okay? I went over to see an elderly lady the other day. Her son lives out of state now, and he called me. She was a former neighbor of mine when I lived in Summers Point. So went over to see her, check on her, because he was concerned about her. She had just gotten out of the hospital, been home a couple days. When I came to the house, I knocked on the door. She recognized me. I don't think she could remember my name, but she knew who I was, and she said, come in, come in. And when I came in, she said to me, you need to take me home. You need to take me home. She thought she was still in the hospital. And I said to her, you are home. She said, no, you need to take me home. After a couple times of this back and forth, I took her by the hand. As soon as I touched her hand, as soon as I held her hand, I could feel her calm down. I said, come on in here. I took her into her kitchen. I said, this is your kitchen. This is where you live. Sat her down. I said, there was some bread and jelly on the table. I said, you want to make you a little sandwich? So I made her a sandwich. And while I was there, I could hear her talking to herself about, I thought I was still in the hospital, but I'm home. This is my house. But the pivotal thing there was words weren't doing it, but when I took her hand, it kind of calmed her down. So don't be afraid to put a hand on somebody's shoulder, put an arm around them, physically direct them to a seat. Come on, let's sit down. Let's just relax a little bit. We'll work this out. Everything's going to be okay. All right? Crisis calls for prompt and calm action. Helpers must remain calm. If they get upset too, those in crisis lose confidence in them. A little while later, we're going to talk about adolescence. Adolescence kind of is a crisis. It's just like a long crisis. Or a series of crises strung together. And one of the things over the years that I worked with adolescents that I used to try to remind parents is this. Your child just got on a roller coaster, and the ride's going to last a long time. What they don't need is for you to be riding the roller coaster with them. They need you to stand on the platform, steady. And as they go by on the roller coaster, you say to them, this ride will be over soon. Everything's going to be okay. And you'll be on the platform here with me. And that's what you have to do with somebody going through a crisis. They're all over the place. They don't need us to be all over the place too. Does it mean we have to be robots and not have emotions? No, you can be feeling their pain, but try to stay steady. They need some steadiness in their life. And that's what you can bring. So much of this crisis, we're calling it crisis counseling, so much of it's nonverbal. It's just being there. It's just letting them know you're not alone. Okay, the words you say don't have to be many, but they should be calm, in a calm voice. You might have to repeat yourself many times. It's okay. This isn't a thing of how many creative ways can you think of saying it. Say the same thing. It's going to be okay. I know, it's upsetting, but it's going to be okay. I'm not going to leave you. I'm staying here with you. Everything's going to be okay. Just to be the influence that they need to kind of regroup, okay? Action is important, okay? Sometimes people are literally paralyzed and unaware of decisions that have to be made. So you have to be able to take certain actions for them or help them make decisions that have to be made. And sometimes just doing something brings people comfort. If you say, okay, you know what? We're going to go over here. We're going to do this. We're going to go get a glass of water. We're going to make a phone call, okay? I'm going to call whoever it is you're going to call, their relative, their husband, their wife, their cousin, their parent, whatever it is. We're going to call somebody. Everything's going to be okay. You doing something all of a sudden can create in them a feeling of like, okay, this problem's being addressed. This problem's being solved. They don't even have to solve it. You're showing them that there are people around them that are taking charge when they feel that it is out of control, and they're going to help get it back under control. So, what are the biblical principles behind what we're doing here? We could say do those things, and they're nice things to do, but what are the biblical principles? Well, one thing is simply this. The only hope that exists, and the only help that really exists, all comes from God. All right, Psalm 121, 1 and 2 says, I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where shall my help come from? My help comes from the Lord who made the heaven and the earth. So why is it biblical counseling in a crisis instead of just being a nice guy counseling? It's because we're operating from a place that God's got this. God's going to show us what to do. Okay? We're going to trust God through this. He's going to reveal to us what we need to do. And He won't let us down. Jesus, in some ways, we can see the model of what He did as a crisis counselor when Lazarus died. He walked into a crisis. He walked into two people, Martha and Mary, who were just beside themselves. And you talk about emotions. I've always believed that when Martha says to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. I don't think she says it like this. If you had been here, my brother probably wouldn't have died. I think she was furious. They sent for him 4 days ago. And he didn't come. And I think she was in full-blown crisis mode, and she was not in denial so much as anger at that moment. And I think she was in Jesus' face. If you had been here where you were supposed to be, my brother would not have died. Now, Jesus brings her hope. That's what He does. He doesn't react. See, He doesn't get his emotions don't go where her emotions are going. He doesn't defend Himself. He doesn't say, yo, chill, I got this. He says, your brother will rise again. He brings her hope, immediate hope. It's okay. I know you're upset, Martha, but your brother's going to rise again. She was all upset about the situation, but Jesus comes in and says, it's okay. I understand that you're grieving, but you're going to see your brother again. She answers Jesus and says, well, I know he'll rise on the last day, as if to say, what good's that do me now? And Jesus says, no, it's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about right now, today. You're going to see him again in just a few minutes. My personal thought is Mary comes and asks him, or says the same thing, but we just get a big different picture of Mary and Martha in the other story about them. So I kind of think maybe she was different in how she said it. I don't know. I like to read my Bible with like expression. You know what I mean? Like I think this idea that when Jesus is talking, that he's always like this, therefore thou shalt, you know what I mean? Like I think Jesus had a lot of emotion. I think he laughed. When there's a town they're trying to go through and the people don't want them to go through there, and James and John say, well, what do you want? Let's call down fire on them from heaven. Let's just destroy this town. And Jesus calls them Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. He says, you guys, listen, sons of thunder there. Cool your jets, you know what I mean? We're not going to call down fire. But I imagine Jesus was laughing when he said that. Like, yo, guys, come on now. You know, this isn't what we're about. Now, Romans 8:28. For a Christian, maybe second on the list behind John 3:16. Okay? If you took a poll of Christians that know certain scriptures by chapter and verse, John 3:16, almost exclusively a believer would know. Even people who watch football games know that it exists. They might not know what it means. Somebody asked me one time, what is that thing they hold up at the football games sometimes? Which is a great opening, which is why they hold it up. So that people will ask other people. It's great. But Romans 8:28 is probably another one that we know, and it's so pertinent in situations like this, especially for believers. But when somebody's in a crisis, honestly, they may not want to hear it. So we got to be careful, because Romans 8:28 is not a Band-Aid. It's not, I just said this so now you can feel better. Okay? Everything's fine now. I just read you a scripture. Okay? I don't know that you want to necessarily even quote it per se, but you want to be able to convey it that somehow, in the midst of our worst tragedies and trials and struggles, God's somehow going to make this okay. That's really what you want to try to convey. It's going to be okay. Do you need an extra copy? No. Okay. So what we're looking at is, just recapping real quick, how to counsel in a crisis versus what we've been talking about for the main 5 weeks of the early part of the course here. So we're looking at the model of Jesus as a person who brings comfort to people who are going through struggles. And we just talked about how he brings comfort to Martha and Mary in the death of their brother Lazarus. Let's look at some other things that Jesus said. He brings comfort to people by showing them that God cares about you. So Jesus says in Matthew 10:29-31, not even a sparrow, which is worth only half a penny, can fall to the ground without your Father knowing about it. And the very hairs on your head are numbered. So don't be afraid. You are more valuable to him than a whole flock of sparrows. So one of the things we want to do is be able to remind people that God cares about you. He knows what's going on. He's got a plan to help you get through this somehow. And it's very okay for you to say, I don't quite know how he's going to do it at this point. Maybe you don't either, but I got to believe, and we've got to hold on to some hope that somehow God's going to work through this and show us what to do. Jesus was always trying to bring people to a place of comfort and peace. He was preparing his disciples for the ultimate crisis that he knew was coming, that they had no idea. And it wasn't because he hadn't warned them, because he had warned them several times. Just so you know, guys, It's a matter of days now. They're going to arrest me. They're going to kill me. Okay? And they would say things like, can we sit next to you in your kingdom? Or, who's the greatest among us? And Jesus would be like, wow. You guys are in for a shock. You're not getting this. But the night before all this goes down, he says to him in John 14:27, peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid or fearful. So, we're trying to bring peace to people. We're trying to help them just have something to hold on to. And you may be what they're holding on to in the midst of a crisis. Okay? One of the things that you've got to be able to calculate in your own mind. Okay? Because you're a person too. And one thing you don't want to do is make promises that are unrealistic. But if, for instance, let me just say this. If the person's going through something and they need somebody to be there with them, but you know that in about 3 hours you have to be somewhere and it's not negotiable, tell them that. Just say, I'm going to stay with you here for the next few hours. Then I have to leave for a little bit, but I will come back after that. Okay? People in a crisis, it's helpful for them to, it's like, the term is didactic. Okay? It's what you do with a younger child. Okay? You don't, if you do, good luck, but it's not advisable to move preschoolers without prior warning. Okay? So we always try to tell little kids, in 5 minutes, we're going to pick all these toys up, we're going to Nana's house, whatever it is. Okay? We're trying to let them know step by step so they can get that in their mind. So if you say to somebody, and if they're saying to you over and over again, but you're not going to leave, are you? Just say the same thing. I'm going to stay with you for a couple hours. I do have to leave for a little bit, but then I will come back. And if you can find somebody else that can slip into your spot while you're gone, you can say that. Okay? While I'm gone, you see this lady here? Well, she's a friend too, and she's going to stay with you while I'm gone. In a crisis, people just need to know that there's going to be some continuity because their entire world has just been blown up. And some sense of normalcy, some sense of predictability can bring them comfort. Even though you're not fixing the problem. You don't have necessarily the wherewithal, the resources to make the problem better all of a sudden. What you're trying to do is the waves are looking pretty big around them. And you're trying to say, it's okay, we're in the boat. Okay? And I'm not going to let the boat capsize. The waves are big, but we're going to stay in this boat and we're going to be safe here. In James 1:19, it says, every one of us should be a ready listener. Listening is crucial. There's a difference between hearing and listening, okay? Hearing is gaining information for yourself. Listening is caring for and being empathetic. Remember where we talked about empathetic towards others. It has been said, and I agree 100%, that Job's 3 friends, when they first came in the midst of his crisis, and there may be no greater crisis that anybody's ever experienced, because we talk about what Job went through in comparing when people are going through a crisis. Yeah, it's like Job, it's like it's almost as bad as Job. He's the standard for crises. One after another, boom, boom, boom. The next messenger comes. Oh, by the way, your house collapsed. Oh, by the way, your crops are gone. Oh, by the way, your children are dead. It was like one thing after another. So when his 3 friends come to him, at first, they're 3 of the best counselors on the planet for one simple reason. They don't say anything. They just sit there with him. That's what he needs, actually. He needs somebody to stay there with him through his crisis. And at that point, they're doing a dang good job of it. And we would think it might have even been bringing him some comfort. Then they make one terrible mistake. They start to talk. And they start trying to make sense of it all for Job, even though they don't have any idea what they're talking about. Because ultimately they're trying to do what I call defending God. Okay? You don't have to defend God. God's a big boy. He can handle it if people are mad at him. And what happens is when we try to defend God, we actually can flip the script on the person who's angry at God and tell them it's your fault. Not intentionally, but that's what ends up happening. You know, people say, why'd God let this happen? Well, you know, we don't know. We don't know, so don't pretend that you know. Over time, God will hopefully reveal to them what's going on. You know, the interesting thing about the book of Job, Tracy's just been studying the book of Job intently. The interesting thing about the book of Job is that at the end of the story, we know what happened and why it happened. There's no indication that Job ever was let in on the story of what was happening behind the scenes. Everything was restored to him tenfold. That was wonderful. But there's never any indication that he ever really understood what happened and why it happened. He gets to talk to God, but when he finally gets to talk to God, he basically says, you are too great for me to even think to ask you anything. And he never really gets an answer. In this lifetime, there may be tragedies that people go through and crises that people go through that will never, ever, ever, ever make sense to them. Doesn't mean they can't come to terms with it or find peace in it. It just means that far be it from us to explain something that may be unexplainable. Better to be like Job's friends on the first day. Or actually, I think they were like that for a few days until they finally decided to be experts on God. So to listen, just to be there. Galatians 6:2 says, bear one another's burdens. Okay, that's it. You're just there to help carry the pain, to feel what they're feeling, to know that they're not by themselves. Romans 14:19, eagerly pursue what makes for harmony and mutual edification, development of one another. Just building the person back up. Everything's just been knocked down, trying to build them back up. Hey, I'm here. It's going to be okay. We're going to get through this together. Whatever words can bring edification. That's your guideline, edification. Build them back up. That's all. You're going to be okay. 1 Thessalonians 5:14. Brothers and sisters, we urge you to warn those who are lazy, encourage those who are timid, take tender care of those who are weak, and be patient with everyone. Patience. 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 Because people go through crises and recover from crises at different schedules. So we don't want to be impatient with somebody who a month into their crisis is still a basket case. And you promised, I'll be there for you. And now you're feeling like, get over it. But you can't. You got to let them process it in their time. Be patient. Take tender care. I like that. You know, there's different versions that use different words. I like that one. Take tender care of those who are weak. All right. I'm going to take our break a little bit early, and then we'll finish up these pages, and I have one other handout for you. So take a little breather right now. That clock was never turned back, but it's still got the minutes right, so. Oh, you did, okay.
Yeah.
You guys have enough over there? Still need one? Or are you okay? Okay, so last two pages of the handout I gave you before the break are just a little bit of a rundown of kind of steps, how to think of crisis intervention or crisis counseling in terms of steps, okay? First step is immediate intervention, okay? You've got to get in there, be willing to help somebody take charge of a situation. Sometimes people are cut off from sources of support, either physically or maybe they have damaged relationships with family members. They need somebody there. And it doesn't matter if your relationship with them is deep and long or if you barely know them. You can be there for somebody in a crisis. You know, you could walk up in the midst of a car accident and be the person that somebody is leaning on, okay? When I was only 17 years old, a strange thing, we happened to be driving. I might have been 16 because I don't think I could drive at the time. One of my friends had a license and we were driving together, you know, going around being teenagers out and about. And we were driving down the highway and the car in front of us made a left-hand turn into the parking lot of an Acme. I remember it distinctly. It was Westfield Road. And there were two motorcycles coming the other way. And he did have his blinker on, but he just kind of turned right in front of them. And I watched those two motorcycles hit that car, and I watched those two riders fly over the roof of that car and come, you know, scattering all over this street, and one kind of end up in the parking lot. And so I told my friend, stop the car. So we got out, and I remember going over to this one young guy, and he wanted to get up and start moving on. I didn't know nothing about nothing at 16, but I knew this much: don't move. You know? So I said, no, you stay here. He kept saying, well, how's my friend? I said, a couple of my friends had gone over and said, there's people over there with him. It's okay, you stay here, and I'm going to stay here with you till the ambulance comes. At 16, I knew a little bit about this instinctively. Maybe God gave me the grace, you know. But sometimes you're just the person who's there, and if you're there, be there. Be actively there. Let them know it's okay, I'm here for you. You know, if you don't know them that well, ask them questions. What's your name? You know, where are you from? Start establishing some type of rapport, okay? The second step is action, whatever that action would be. Do you need me to call somebody? I'll tell you another crazy story. I was much older by this time, but I had this knack for being near accidents all my life, I guess. But we were in Maine on a family vacation, and we were driving down a road in the woods, and I was coming up towards a stop sign. So, you know, instinctively I just kind of looked around me, which included looking in my rearview mirror, just to be sure somebody's not coming up on me too quick. In my rearview mirror, this is what I see. About 50 yards behind me, I see a minivan go like this, directly off the road into a telephone pole. Snapped the telephone pole in half. And now smoke and, you know, steam from the radiator, everything just flying out of this car. So I pulled my car off the side of the road, my wife and my kids in it, and I said, I gotta go see what's going on here. So I run back, and there's a lady in the front seat, the airbag deployed, and I said to her, come on over here, we're gonna go over to my car, okay? We're gonna get away from your car, we're gonna go to my car, and we're gonna see if you're okay. So we get over to my car, and Laura's talking to her, and this is, if you knew me back in those days, I wasn't real big on technology, okay? So, like, I didn't have a cell phone, you know what I mean? And so we were out in the middle of the woods. And so my wife alertly said to her, do you have a cell phone? Knowing that we didn't have one, okay? And she said, yes. And my wife said, where is it? She said, in my car. So I had to go back to this car that was sputtering and steaming and smoke coming out of everywhere. And reach into her pocketbook and get her cell phone and run back and call 911, and they sent help to us. We didn't know her, but all of a sudden, honestly, we were her best friends because she needed somebody, and we were there. And you know, I'll tell you, the story she told us was fascinating. in retrospect, because she was okay, so we were glad to know she was okay. But I said to her, what happened? She said, I was driving along and a bee flew in the window. And she said, I was freaking out because it was buzzing around me. And then she said, it landed on my knee. Now this is the knee, the right knee, which is on the gas pedal. So she said, I slapped it. And now, think of the mechanics of this. She's got her knee on the gas pedal, one hand on the steering wheel. Which hand? The left hand. So as she's slapping and accelerating, she goes like this. Right off the road, right in the telephone pole. Snapped it. So you just don't know. You come up with a situation, one thing you need to do is be able to take action. She was stunned. I've never experienced this. Maybe you have had an airbag go off in your face. You know, people say it's like getting punched, you know. It can be stun you, you know what I mean? So in a situation, whether it's that, and look, that's car accidents. Getting word that somebody in your family, somebody close to you has died can be that same feeling. Like you just got punched in the face. You're disoriented, okay? That's why there's referees in boxing matches to call the fight when they realize that one boxer has lost all sense of reality. He thinks he can still fight. He doesn't know, dude, you're like out of it. He would keep going. Okay? When I was playing indoor soccer. Indoor soccer has been described as human pinball. And a guy kicked the ball from like point blank range and hit me in the face. And it bounced off of my face into the stands.
Oh my God.
And the referee says to my coach, Coach, you might want to check your player. And the coach says to me, you all right? I said, yeah, I'm fine. And then he said, yeah, come on. Put a substitute in for me. I said, what's the matter? He says, go in the locker room. I go in the locker room, and there's blood trickling down both my nostrils. I'm lucky I didn't break my nose. But I didn't know. I was in shock. As far as I was concerned, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Took somebody else who had a more objective viewpoint to recognize that they needed to make a decision for me to get me out of harm's way. And that might be what you have to do in a crisis. You might have to make a decision for a person. You know what? Let's do this. It may not be what they think is best, but they're not necessarily thinking clearly. Okay? And if they would rather do A rather than B, you don't have to argue about it, but you can say, well, you know what? Let's do this first. Okay? We're not saying we're not going to do that. We'll get to that. How about we do this first? Okay? And even if you have to say things like, do it for me. Okay? I would be more comfortable if we did this. And then we can talk about that. Let's sit over here and then we'll talk about doing that. But you want to try to take charge of the situation and be the balancing influence, the stabilizing influence. Okay? It says your listening is important for the purpose of gathering information. Do you know who we need to call? Does anybody know where you are right now? Okay? Who do you think we should let know? The third step of crisis counseling is to get a limited goal of counseling. Like, what are we going to do next? That's all. You don't have to solve the whole problem. What's our next step going to be? Is it going to be an ambulance ride to the hospital? Is it going to be somebody coming to pick you up? What is that going to look like? Trying to make a plan with the person, and if they're not capable, make a plan for the person. Fourth, as we talked about before, hope in the midst of hopelessness. Just being able to say, it's okay. I know this is scary. I know that, you're worried about what's going to happen. But you know what? We're going to trust God. We're going to pray. We're going to believe that God's got the answers, even though we don't know what they are. We don't know what to do next. We're going to believe He's going to show us what to do next. The fifth step is provide support. Just to be there, whatever that looks like, whatever they need at that moment. Okay? And step number 6, focused problem solving. That's more for a long-term type of thing, okay? Where are we going to go with this? What do you think you need to do today, tomorrow, the next day? It doesn't mean that's the plan they're going to follow, but it can give people hope to believe that there are steps. Okay, we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, and then after that, then we're going to call this person, you know. And once again, I used the term earlier, didactic. You're taking them by the hand like a toddler, saying, remember, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. Okay? With my mother-in-law's situation, because of the effect of the disease on her body, she forgets everything. We have to repeat it over and over and over. And you've probably dealt with some people that have had that, people with Alzheimer's, dementia, whatever. Say it a million times. Remember what the scripture told us earlier. With those who are weak, have patience. Patience. You know? And let me just tell you this, because I don't think my wife would mind my use this for example. I'll tell you a little bit of the scenario with my mother-in-law. She had a crisis where she went in the hospital, she had a stroke. When she came out of stroke, everything was jumbled, everything was disoriented. And so she would ask us this question: how did I get here? Okay, how did I get here to the hospital? Okay, and so I would say to her, well, you had a problem that required going in the hospital. What was it? You had a problem with your toe because of your diabetes. And she'd say, did they cut off my toe? Yes, they did. And then after that surgery, something happened because of the surgery. What? You had a stroke. That's why you're confused. I do not exaggerate if I tell you 30 seconds later, she would say, how did I get here? And we would do the whole thing over and over again. But then I started to say to her, well, I want you to help me. We're going to figure this out, okay? You had to go in the hospital. Do you know why? No. It had something to do with your diabetes. Was it my toe? Yes. So I got her to a point where she could answer some of her own questions, where she could process it herself. And then she would say to me, how did I get here? I'd say, well, Mom, you actually know. So think about it now. See if you can tell me how you got here. And she would say, I went in the hospital, right? Yes. Do you remember why? I had surgery. Yes. What was it on? My toe. Yes. They cut off my toe, didn't they? Yes. Then what happened? I had a stroke. That's right. That's why you're here. So I tried to get her to be able to put the pieces together. And that was effective. And sometimes you might be able to help somebody gain some level of sense of control over their own life after you've explained a dozen times. We're going to do this. Then we called your husband. He's going to be here soon. Ask them. You know, just kind of sense what the Holy Spirit's telling you, but say to them, well, why don't you tell me, because we've talked about this now. See if you can remember what our plan is. Because if they can repeat the plan out of their mouth, they can gain a sense of control over the situation, because I know what the plan is. I just said it. So my life's not spiraling out of control. I've got a plan and I know what it is. So that's why this is so important, to help them get a sense of where we're going with this. How are we moving out of this crisis back towards some sense of sanity again, some sense of life not being unmanageable or chaotic, to we've got a problem here, but we've got a plan. That's what we're trying to get people to understand. There's hope, because even though you've got a difficult situation, we're taking steps to make it better. All right, two subcategories here, okay? Ministering to children and ministering to adolescents. Children can get overlooked in crises sometimes. When there's a lot of stuff going on in the adults' lives around them, some children just, you know the old saying, children should be seen and not heard? Well, it's not true, but sometimes that's exactly what happens. They just stand there and stare while this whirlwind's going on around them. Now, in the little prelude they give you before you fly, they always tell you this: put your oxygen mask on first before you take care of those around you, okay? So you do need to stabilize. Let me put it this way. The best thing you can do to help a child in the midst of a crazy situation like that is help the adult that they're looking to for support. If mom's in chaos, it's going to scare the child. If they see mom getting back under control, then that's good for them. But we don't want to ignore the fact that they are people too, and they have less resources to make sense of things than an adult would. They don't understand a lot of things. They've not had enough experiences. Listen, you can say to an adult, and oftentimes it's good in a crisis to say, listen, you've got, especially if you know them, especially if you know that this isn't their first crisis, because life can be a series of crises. So if you could say to somebody, listen, you've gotten through other stuff, you're going to get through this. You help them draw upon their own experiences to say, that's true. I had this happen and I got through it. I had this happen and I got through it. If you know them well enough, it's okay to name those things that they got through. You remember this happened and you came out okay. And remember when a couple years ago when this happened? But you made it through that, didn't you? Well, you're going to get through this too. Kids don't have that wealth of experience to draw on. It may be the first crisis they've ever had. They have no reason to believe that it's ever going to get better. But you can tell them that it is. And you can tell them it's going to get better because you're a grown-up and you know stuff. And you can say, you can trust me. It's going to be okay. Okay? I know you see your mom or your dad, so-and-so's upset right now, but it's okay. We're going to take care of this, and you're going to be fine. I had a girl come to me when I was a school counselor, and she had moved into our town during adolescence, and we're going to talk about adolescence in just a minute, but as was unfortunately typical of those years, she was the new kid, she was the outsider, and the local girls had already decided who could be friends with who, and she was the outsider, so she was going to be nobody's friend, and she was ostracized, and it was just terrible, terrible, absolute worst situation a kid could walk into. But she was a wonderful kid, and she just was so distraught about this because they were just giving her the business, you know. And so I told her, I said, listen, I want to tell you something. This is a hard thing you're going through right now, but you're going to get past this, and in fact, you're going to have a good life. And I said, do you know why I know that? Because I know people. That's my business. That's what I do. I work with people. And I can tell when people have what it takes to make it. And you have what it takes. You're smart. You're talented. You have a good attitude towards life. You work hard, so forth and so on. And I said, you're going to have to trust me on this one. Because I don't blame you for not thinking that what I'm saying is really going to happen. But it is. And even if you can't believe it for yourself, believe it because I told you it is. Now this was, I believe, 7th grade when she came to my school. Okay? She was there, 7th and 8th grade. My school was ended at that age, and they went on to the high school, Mainland High School. She went off to Mainland. She went off to college. 8 years. Well, it was really 9 years because I talked to her about it in 7th grade. 9 years later, there was a knock at my door in my office. And I looked up immediately. I knew who it was. I said, well, how you doing? She said, oh, I'm doing really well. She said, I graduated such and such a college with a degree and this and that. And she said, you know what kept me going? You told me that I would make it. So that can make a real difference. If an adult, the child looks up, you're big. To a child, you're big, you know everything. If you can say, listen, I know you might be scared, I know there's a lot going on right now that seems confusing, it's going to be okay. And you could say to them, if you're not sure what's going on, if you want to talk about it, You can ask me. I will tell you what's going on. Okay? Now, adolescence. Notice the way it's worded here. Ministering to children in crisis, the crisis of adolescence. Of course, to an adolescent, a lot of things can be a crisis. Life is a crisis. Hormones are changing, body's changing, desires are developing, everything's all over the map. Feelings of self-worth are like, acceptance by their peers, like I just talked about, the transition from going from childhood to adulthood, all that stuff. And I mentioned this when we had the Q&A because the questions came in from the teens. And one of the teens asked a question about struggling with depression, how can God help me with my depression? And I talked about this then. What makes the adolescence even more difficult for teens is that there is a natural process, a normal process of differentiation that goes on during adolescence where a teen is trying to determine who they are. And up till the teenage years, generally, they've already accepted that they are who you said they were. Okay, if you said, Johnny, you're smart, then he knows he's smart. If you said, Susie, you're a good athlete, then she knows she's a good athlete. But when adolescence develops, a psychologist by the name of Jean Piaget did a wonderful thing by explaining that children's brains are different than adult brains. They don't think like we think. We forget what it was like to be a child. We think we remember, but we don't. They think differently. They process information differently. And it's not till their teenage years that they develop the ability to step outside of the box and look at themselves objectively. And that's scary. And now they're wondering, like, who am I? And, where do I fit into this world? And am I okay? Am I normal? Do people like me? Am I going to be okay? Now, the problem that compounds that is that the very people who have been their source of strength and identity for all these years, generally their parents, are now like, it doesn't matter what you say because you're my mom. You have to say that. So they tend to disregard the strongest source of support they have. And there's also another thing going on where the first step for many adolescents to say who they are is to say who they're not. And they're basically saying, you know what, I'm not you. Okay? And you don't get me. And you don't understand me. Okay? And you don't know what it's like to be me. Okay? And that's just normal, natural stuff. But what it does is it puts them in a crisis mode where the newest thing that just happened to them that they've never experienced before is earth-shattering. It might be the end of the world as far as they're concerned. And they would tend, in some cases are different from others, but they would tend to not be as likely to go to their parents as when they were 8 years old, 9 years old, and so forth. So they don't have that strength or that resource. So that's why, as Christians, as people who are interacting with adolescents, whether they're here at church or members of your family or neighbors, you can actually fill in that gap. You can be that kind and caring adult who listens to them, who reassures them. Yeah, it's hard. I remember when I was your age, it's tough. And, find something good for them to focus on. Look for the things, well, I heard you're playing on the soccer team. How you doing, Build them up. Build them up. Make them feel good about themselves. And do not be afraid to bring your faith into it, regardless of where their faith's at. Well, I know that one thing that makes a difference for me when I'm wondering, like, how I feel about myself is I know God loves me. And I know God don't create no junk. And I know that you're important to God too, I've told parents over the years, it's kind of like, here's the path of childhood, and you're just going along, and then adolescence hits. And there's like this box. And it's like they just bounce around inside that box for a few years. And then you hope they come out the other end still in one piece. That's what it is. It's just a tough time for young people. They're at risk. Unfortunately, we talked in one of the very first weeks of our class about the cultural, the societal model that is designed, it's not accidental, it is designed to make us feel bad about ourselves so that we will buy products that are designed to promise to make us feel better about ourselves. And in fact, my wife pointed this out to me last night, just a simple commercial about this new product called Coke Zero. Okay, Coke Zero supposedly has no sugar or no calories or something, but the same great taste as Coke, whatever. But the point of the commercial was these guys are having a great time. You know what I mean? They're having a great time. And why are they having a great time? Because they're drinking Coke Zero. Right? You want to have as much fun as these guys? It's real easy. Go get this product and your life will be wonderful too. And adolescents are bombarded with that stuff. Pictures of models that they can never possibly look like, but if you buy this makeup, you just might have a chance, you know? If you ever, down the bottom here, there's a couple books. Norman Wright's Crisis Counseling, a handbook of counseling Christian youth. You know Josh McDowell, very well-known name, counseling teenagers. I'll add one name to this that's not a Christian-based book, but it is a very powerful book. It's called, it's either called Saving or Raising Ophelia. Ophelia was a character in a Shakespeare play that is a young girl who drowns herself because she can't face life around her. And it talks about, I found it a very powerful book because I raised two daughters. My wife and I raised two daughters. And seeing, this book describes what girls go through in our society compared to boys. I mean, boys are targeted, but not nearly the way that girls are. You know, it's almost malicious what the culture does to the girls in our society. And they really need encouragement. They really need strength. They really need, let me tell you something. I'll tell you one simple thing. Can I encourage you, if you're a member of this church, to think about this? Find a girl in this church and learn her name. And when you see her, call her by name. That's all. Just do that. Because that'll make a difference in her life. That somebody knows who she is and says hi to her by name. Or says, how you doing this morning, Jeannie? Or whatever, whoever it is. It can make a world of difference. See, there's a term for this in counseling. It's called significant others. Okay, teachers tend to be the front line of that, significant others. But, you know, for kids whose families are in church, gosh, we have a great opportunity to be significant others in their lives, supporting what their parents are doing. And let me tell you something. When the kid's talking to you and they're saying to you, you know, this is my problem, blah, 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 understand that they may be coming to you because they're at that point in their adjustment to young adulthood that they don't feel like they want to talk to mom and dad about the way they used to. But you can encourage them to do that. You know, don't replace their mom and dad. Support their mom and dad. You know, say, well, you know what? I'm glad you're talking to me about this. And you can always come and talk to me. I'm always here for you. But have you talked to your mom and dad about this? Because they need to know too. You know, they would want to hear what you're telling me. We've got to build a support network for these kids because it's a tough world out there. And thank God that they have a church family, but we want to be effective in our role there. All right, real quickly. I'm looking at a clock that doesn't exist anymore. Take that other 2 pages I gave you there, okay? This is from Christianity Today. It's a quick counsel for crisis. It's probably a quick survey is probably what it should say or something like that. But let me turn this off so it doesn't keep going off. This is not James Barclay, by the way. If you read it real quick, you might think James Barclay wrote this. This is not James Barclay. James Berkeley, okay, wrote this in Christianity Today. This is one specific type of crisis that can really be sticky. So I want to cover it just to tell you more than anything the pitfalls in this. and it has to do with marriage crises, okay? Somebody's having difficulty in their marriage, you get called. This is not the kind of thing you're going to walk into accidentally. This is going to be, can you come over here because we've got a problem. So what are the immediate concerns? Is there any physical danger? Okay? If you walk out, if you've walked in and you ask yourself, if I leave here, is somebody going to get hurt? Okay? If I stay, am I going to get hurt? Do the police need to be called? Okay? Not a decision you can make easily, but you've got to be thinking, that's got to be your first line of assessment of the situation. Loud voices don't necessarily mean call the police. Things getting thrown, now you're thinking this could get dangerous. Should you say to one of the spouses, obviously the person who's the same sex that you are, okay? I'm not going to tell the wife to come with me, okay? But I might tell the husband to come with me. Why don't you and I take a walk? Let's you and I go for a ride. If you're a woman, you say to her, look, why don't we just come to my house? We'll talk about this there. Let him cool down, okay? So that's your first thing you're trying to decide, okay? Secondly, decide whether to be asked to help or take the initiative. In other words, just because you walked in a room doesn't mean it's like, all right, listen up, guys, okay? You're not necessarily the referee until you're asked to be the referee, okay? All you're doing when you first enter is just assess. Just be quiet. Just listen and observe and see what's going on. Take mental notes about what you're hearing. Okay? You might want to be able to reflect back to them, well, I heard you say, did you really mean that? Okay, so pay attention, taking mental notes. Okay? Keep in mind, emotions are going to be high. People might be angry. People might be crying. Emotions are just emotions. We talked about this early on. Feelings are not a problem, it's actions that are a problem. So just because somebody's upset, just because they're angry, doesn't mean that this is out of control as long as they're venting without it getting dangerous. Okay? Second point. Two people, and I like this little phrase here, and usually a supporting cast, have probably caused this conflict. Okay? This is not, you're not there. This is not a court of law. You're not there to determine the innocent and guilty party. You're not there to determine who's the villain and who's the victim. Okay? There are two sides of the story. That is a biblical statement. And Proverbs says, a man comes and tells his story, and everything about it seems right until the other person comes and speaks and tells their side of the story. So you have to keep that in mind. Okay? So when people are talking and are telling you this, that, and the other thing, it's better to say neutral things like, okay, all right, I hear you. Not like, oh, well, that's the truth then, because you just said it. Because you haven't heard the other person's side yet. Just realize that there's probably a truth somewhere between their versions of the story. Okay? Resolution of the problem will likely be a long process. Could be months, could be years that have built up to this day, and you're not going to fix it instantly. Okay? What you're trying to do is move them from destructive modes of relating to constructive modes of relating. You're trying to get them off of a path that they're on is just spiraling down and try to arrest that downward spiral and get at least leveled off, if not moving back in the right direction. So your role is to open lines of communication, to help them hear and understand each other, to translate misunderstood communication. See, if they invite you in, let's go back to the earlier thing. If nobody asks you, you're going to be told that in those exact terms. Nobody asked you. Okay? So don't speak unless you get an indication that you're being invited to speak. Okay? Or at least put an overture out there and say, would it be all right if I made an observation? Could I possibly say something that might be helpful here? Okay, get an agreement. That might be a good thing. It might diffuse the ping pong match of things that are being volleyed back and forth. Okay? If you hear two people taking a breath at the same time and you feel like maybe it's a good time to just interject and break that pattern. But what you want to do, remember we talked about this concept of active listening, being a parrot? What you want to do is you want to say to each of them, because you want to show fairness in the situation. I'm not favoring anybody. I'm not saying who's right or wrong. You might say, if I'm not mistaken, what I heard you saying is you're concerned about blah and blah. Okay? Now, there's two reasons why you're doing that. One, because you want to make sure you're correct. Okay? That's what active listening does. It says, did I hear you correctly? But not only that, because you're trying to get the person over here to hear you say it, because they're not hearing it from them. They're just too mad to even listen to each other. So you're saying, okay, so you're saying this. All right. You might even want to say, do you hear what she's saying? Because that's what okay. What do you want to tell me? What do you want to say? Okay, and then they tell you, and you say, so what I hear you saying is, your concerns are this and this. Okay? So just getting to that place where the Bible says a soft answer turns away wrath. If you can talk in a calm, slow tone, it forces everything else to come down to earth. So, methodically speak in a calm, slow voice. And if they cut you off and start talking over you, just chill. And you get a chance again to say, okay, well, what I was trying to say earlier was, okay, just calm. Be the platform on the roller coaster. You're the one who's stable. Here's an unfortunate reality. As long as each person's focus is on what the other ought to do, the conflict will continue. That's a reality. Okay? When the focus turns to what can I do to make my marriage work, healing can begin. Look, this is crisis counseling we're talking about. You may not even get to that point. You're trying to diffuse a crisis. But if you could get to that point, if you can get them to calm down enough to say, okay, well, in my experience, I have found that when I'm in conflict with somebody, the most important thing for me is to focus on what I can do to make the conflict better. So could either of you think of something you could do to make this situation a little bit better today that we're looking at right here? If you get somebody to volunteer, that's an awesome thing. Commend them to the moon. That's awesome. That's great. Thank you so much for being willing to take responsibility. And then you is there anything you think you could do? If you can get to that point, look, we're not going to fix everybody's things here, but these are our goals. Things to do or say, okay? Provide the opportunity for controlled release of emotions, but disallow hurtful or spiteful attacks. Try to say to people, look, don't tear each other down. If you're angry, it's okay to say you're angry. If there's things that are upsetting you, it's okay to say that. But it's not going to get better to keep calling each other mean and evil names. Okay? Let the parties know that you are neutral. If you need to, talk to them separately. Say, listen, would you mind just kind of going in a different room right now so we can just talk, and then I'm going to talk to you too. Okay? Each situation is different. I don't know if you get to that point with people or not. Okay? These are just some ideas. Provide understanding. Point out options to the options that they may be considering. Once again, you're trying to be the voice of reason. Encouraging to talk with each other rather than at or about each other. Have them voice things they would appreciate instead of saying what they don't like. Okay? That's if you're getting to the point where you're making progress, okay, it's really helpful to another person to say, what I need in this situation is this. Not, I hate it when you, that. Okay? Try to teach them to say, it's okay to have needs. It's okay to express your needs. But if you present it to a person, and the expression, get more flies with honey than vinegar. You just let them know that. Just tell each other things that you need, but try to tell each other a little nicer. That's all. If they are believers, if they are married believers and they're in a conflict, remind them of the covenant they made with God on their wedding day. Remind them, I don't know about you, but on my wedding day, my vows said for better or for worse. So you're kind of in the worst right now. This is where it gets tough. This is where those vows, you got to decide, do they mean something, and can you honor God Could you be willing to honor God by pressing in, trying to find solutions here, even though you don't necessarily want to honor each other? But can you honor God by saying, all right, I'm going to keep trying and try to find, a new path forward that would honor God? Not all marriages are able in the natural to be salvaged, so you're going to deal with people whose marriages have ended. We want to help people rebuild. We don't need to condemn anybody because of a marriage that didn't work out. Help them rebuild their spiritual, emotional, and family lives, understanding that, God still loves them and their Christian family still loves them. Okay, last little piece of this. Things not to say or do. Okay, you got to resist the urge to designate villains or victims or take sides. It doesn't necessarily mean that the fault is equal. One person may be horrendous, and the other person may have very little fault. But generally, each person has a role in what's going wrong, even if it's very unbalanced, and you still want to try to, Jimmy Carter, I don't think he was a great president. Okay, if you look back at his record and what his presidency was, I don't think he was a great president. I voted for him, actually, but I voted for him because he was born again Christian. And I was kind of disappointed in him as president, but it's okay. But Jimmy Carter, after he was no longer president, was known for two things. One, he got very involved with Habitat for Humanity, that charity. He really built it up and gave it some notoriety. Two, a lot of people don't know this, but he became essentially a hostage negotiator, but on a big scale, with people who were in other countries, that were Americans that were taken hostage by foreign governments. And he would go negotiate with these dictators and terrorists and stuff and get these people released. He had a pretty good track record. And I read an article that the reason why, they asked him, how was he so successful? And he said, because I really truly believed in my heart that the guy I was meeting with, who everybody would say was the bad guy, didn't think he was the bad guy. And so I would talk to him like, what is going on for you? What do you need here? Tell me your side of the story. I don't care that everybody's telling me how evil you are. He didn't say that, but he would imply that. Like, you must be a decent guy, right? You run a country? Come on. And he would gain their trust by saying, your side of the story actually matters. So if you go into a situation where you have a spouse that is just, by most standards, a terrible person, if you can at least indicate to them, look, I still want to hear what you have to say. You're a human being too. This isn't all on you. Sometimes it's pretty much on them, but but it's not going to help to be adversarial is all I'm saying. It's not going to help to be in their face or saying, you know what, you're a lousy husband, and it's not going to do any good. So you've got to try to stay neutral, try not to judge, try not to, and the other thing is, don't assume responsibility to fix the marriage. It's not your job. You can be helpful. You can make suggestions. You can be willing to pray. You can be willing to take people through biblical counseling. But it's up to them. And I have literally been in my office with couples that I have said, because it was the truth, there's 3 people in this room right now, and only one of them cares about your marriage. And unfortunately, it's me. And that's not good. But I can't fix it unless you guys want to fix it. So, don't take this on yourself that you got to be the savior of their marriage, because the only way it's going to be saved is if they invest. You can be a support. You can give them direction. You can pray with them. You can do all kinds of things. You can't fix those things if they don't want to fix them. Don't condemn. People whose marriages are on the rocks already are feeling lousy about it. If they're believers, they may be feeling guilt and condemnation that they're somehow letting God down. You don't need to add to that. Don't underestimate the potential for violence in a domestic quarrel, okay? Be cautious when you come into a situation. It was one of the first things we said. It's the first thing you do. You get in there, or if you're already in there, it starts to get heated, Get out. If it looks dangerous, if you can get one of the parties out with you, even better. Diffuse the situation. Don't be afraid to call the police if it warrants that. And finally, and this last thing on this last page of our last day of class, I'm going to say this is not just applicable to these situations. It is a general rule for any counseling that you're going to do. It's here because of the nature of this. We're talking about marriage counseling. Do not allow an unhealthy attraction or dependence to form between you and a counselee. So if you are the opposite sex person and the counselee, one of those members, starts telling you how wonderful you are and how they wish they were married to you instead of to their spouse, you've got a problem. You can't allow it to go there. Okay? And that is true whether it's crisis counseling or whether it's just that long-term biblical counseling. I would generally advise you not be doing any really long-term biblical counseling with anybody from the opposite sex anyway. But if you've got a situation where you are working with somebody, you're working on something in particular, but it has nothing to do with their marriage, and all of a sudden that comes up, and they start making those kind of references about my husband or my wife is terrible. If I had married somebody like you, I'd be much happier. You need to end that relationship. End it. Say, listen, I don't think I can counsel with you anymore because I'm not comfortable with where the direction of where this is going. But I can direct you to somebody who can help you. Don't leave them in the lurch, but get them to somebody else. Because now you're going to have not just one problem, you're going to have two problems. So that be it, folks.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Any questions about what we covered over the course of the weeks, or any questions about what we covered tonight before we wrap it up?
Do you know the author on that?
You know what? You can't find it? Did you look it up? Raising Ophelia, Saving Ophelia? Reviving Ophelia. Thank you, Joanne. Reviving Ophelia. Because Ophelia, as I say, she drowned herself. She died. We can't let our teens go under in the culture that's trying to take them under. Let's be there for them. So, Father, we just come before you tonight. We just thank you that you have given us over these weeks insight into how we can be a support and a friend and a help and a guide to people that you bring into our lives of all ages for all sorts of reasons. And that our number one guideline is to speak from what we already know. You said that we can comfort in that which we were comforted in. So when we can say to somebody, this is what I went through, and this is what God showed me, and this is what I did, and I can help you with that if you would like to, we know we're on solid ground. Father, whether it's a crisis or whether it's a long-term relationship, help us to be faithful to the call to lead people down the path of righteousness and to be on that path with them, not telling them to walk someplace that we're not going. And Father, in any crisis situation, whether it's a marriage or with an adolescent or somebody who's gone through a tragedy, whatever it is, Lord, give us the strength to hold up those who are weak when they need it the most. And we thank you for these things tonight in Jesus' name. Amen.